The first time Emily realized she was falling in love with her best friend's fiancé, it felt like someone had yanked the ground right from beneath her feet. It happened in a single, irreversible moment, one she would replay in her mind 1,000 times afterward, trying to convince herself that she hadn't crossed some invisible line. But she had, and the guilt settled in her heart like a stone she couldn't lift. It was the kind of heartbreak that didn't explode all at once. It tightened slowly, breath by breath, until every part of her life felt like it was bending under its weight. If you're watching this and you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world and helps us bring more real stories like this to life. Emily Turner wasn't the type to fall for the wrong person. She had grown up in a quiet Ohio town, raised by a single mother who taught her that love was a promise, a decision, and, in its purest form, an act of selflessness. Emily had lived most of her life believing she understood that, believing she could control what she felt, believing she could never, under any circumstances, betray someone she loved. But life seemed to have a strange way of testing the boundaries she had built for herself, and the test came unexpectedly in the form of one man, Daniel Rhodes. Daniel wasn't even supposed to matter in her life. He belonged to her best friend, Haley, her wild, sunshine-filled childhood friend who had been by her side in every messy, beautiful stage of growing up. Haley was the dreamer, the girl who could make an entire room laugh just by walking in. Emily always admired her for that effortless charm. So when Haley met Daniel during a charity fundraiser and introduced him to Emily a week later, Emily assumed she'd simply be happy for her friend. And she was, until she wasn't. Daniel had a quiet presence that drew people in without trying. He listened, really listened, to the stories people told. He remembered tiny details, like Emily's favorite coffee flavor or the book she kept rereading every December because it reminded her of her late father. He spoke softly but with a sincerity that was rare, and Emily, who had always been the quiet one, found herself opening up to him in ways she never expected. At first, she dismissed the connection as harmless friendship. She convinced herself she was just grateful that her best friend had found a good man. But human hearts don't always follow the rules we set for them. It all began to change one cold autumn evening when the three of them were planning Haley and Daniel's engagement party. They had gathered at Haley's apartment, surrounded by ribbons, sample invitations, and the constant buzz of wedding excitement. Emily had been assigned to organize the photo collage, a timeline of Haley and Daniel's love story. She remembered sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through the photos, feeling a strange ache whenever she saw Daniel smiling at Haley. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was more like witnessing a dream she didn't know she had, slipping farther and farther out of reach. That night, while Haley went to grab takeout, Emily and Daniel remained behind, finishing up the decorations. Music played softly from the living room speaker. A slow, nostalgic melody that reminded them both of childhood years, spent imagining what their futures would look like. Daniel sat beside her on the carpet, tying small tags onto mason jars filled with fairy lights. Emily remembered the moment his hand brushed hers. It was accidental, barely noticeable, but the warmth it sparked traveled from her fingertips straight into her chest. She'd pulled her hand away quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed the way her breath hitched. But when she looked up, Daniel was watching her. Really watching her, with an expression she couldn't decipher. She forced a smile, convincing herself she was imagining everything, but imagination didn't explain the trembling in her hands, the heat rushing through her cheeks, or the way her heart beat far too loudly. That was the night Emily realized she was in trouble, because feelings don't ask permission before they form. They grow where they want, especially in the places we least expect. Over the next few months, Emily tried everything she could to create distance between herself and Daniel. She avoided their weekly hangouts, made excuses to skip wedding appointments, and buried herself in work. But avoiding Daniel meant avoiding Haley too, and that hurt even more. Haley noticed, of course, because she always did. She began asking Emily why she seemed distracted, distant, and detached from the wedding planning she had once been so excited about. Emily never had an answer she could speak aloud. Her silence became its own confession. Then came the day that pushed everything to the edge. It was a rainy afternoon in early spring. Emily had stopped by a local grocery store after work, desperately trying to shake off another long day of guilt and confusion. She was heading to the parking lot when she heard a voice calling her name. She turned, and there he was, Daniel, drenched in rain, holding his jacket over his head, running toward her like he'd been searching for her in a storm. She froze instantly, unable to ignore the undeniable pull that twisted something deep inside her chest. He explained that he had been trying to reach her for days. Haley had told him Emily wasn't herself, and he was worried, genuinely worried. Emily felt the familiar guilt tighten around her ribs. She didn't deserve his concern. She told him she was fine, but Daniel didn't buy it. His eyes held something raw, something unguarded. In that moment, under the rain hitting the pavement like soft whispers, Emily felt her walls crumble. Not because Daniel said something romantic, but because he said something honest. He told her she mattered, not because she was Haley's best friend, but because she was Emily. He told her she didn't have to disappear just because things were changing. She had a place in their lives, and he didn't want to lose her. It wasn't a confession of love, but it was enough to shake her world. Emily went home that night feeling like her heart was being torn in two. One half loved Haley fiercely. The other half didn't know how to stop loving Daniel. She spent days trying to gather the courage to tell Haley the truth. Not that she loved Daniel, but that she needed space, that she had emotions she couldn't control, that she was afraid of hurting someone who meant everything to her. But every time she tried, the words faded into fear. Then something unexpected happened. Haley called Emily one morning, her voice trembling. She needed to talk, in person. Emily rushed to meet her at a quiet lakeside park where they often spent summers together. Haley looked pale, stressed, and nothing like the bright, confident girl Emily had always known. Emily's heart sank as she sat beside her on a weathered bench. Haley confessed that things with Daniel had been strained. Not because of Emily, but because Haley wasn't sure she was marrying him for the right reasons. She admitted she admired Daniel, loved him even, but part of her felt she had rushed into engagement out of fear of being left behind, fear of not having her life figured out, fear that she wasn't enough on her own. Emily listened silently, stunned. Haley wasn't asking for advice, she was asking for honesty. She asked Emily what she thought, what she had sensed. Emily could have lied. She could have pretended everything was perfect to protect her friend. But something inside her whispered that honesty, no matter how painful, was the only path that wouldn't destroy them both. So Emily told her that love shouldn't be built on fear, and marriage shouldn't feel like an obligation. She told her Daniel deserved someone who was sure. And Haley deserved clarity, not pressure. It was the hardest truth she had ever spoken. Haley didn't cry, not immediately. But she held Emily's hand and looked at her with a vulnerability Emily hadn't seen in years. She whispered that she needed time to figure out her heart, and for the first time in months, Emily felt a flicker of something like relief. Relief not for herself, but for her friend, who finally allowed herself to feel uncertain. Over the following weeks, Haley and Daniel took a break from wedding planning. They talked deeply, honestly, about what they wanted. Emily stayed away, letting them heal or separate in their own time. She didn't interfere. She prayed silently for the best outcome, even if that outcome meant her own heart would never have what it secretly longed for. Then, one warm afternoon in June, Haley showed up unannounced at Emily's door. She wasn't wearing her engagement ring. Emily knew her decision before she even spoke. Haley had called off the wedding, not out of heartbreak but out of clarity. She realized she loved Daniel, but not in a way that could sustain a marriage. She wanted to find herself before tying her life to someone else's. Daniel, though sad, understood. Haley pulled Emily into a long hug, thanking her for telling the truth even when it hurt. She told Emily she wanted her to be happy, and that happiness shouldn't feel like betrayal. That night, when Emily stepped outside to get some air, she found Daniel waiting on her porch. His expression was gentle but weighted with unspoken words. He told her that he and Haley parted on good terms, and that Haley had shared the conversation they'd had at the lake. He admitted that, somewhere along the way, he had begun caring for Emily in ways he tried to ignore, ways he had no right to feel at the time. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, not because he confessed something romantic, but because life had twisted itself in ways none of them could have predicted. They talked, slowly, carefully, respectfully. They didn't rush into declarations or promises. They simply acknowledged the truth, that sometimes love grows in impossible places and sometimes hearts collide despite every moral line trying to hold them apart. Emily wasn't sure what the future held, and neither was Daniel, but for the first time their feelings didn't feel wrong. They simply felt human. And maybe that was enough. As the screen fades, if this story touched your heart or made you feel something deep inside, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the power of honesty, forgiveness, and imperfect love. Before the ending, please comment below. Everyone deserves a chance to heal. Because sometimes the bravest thing a heart can do is tell the truth before it breaks.